Hello there, faithful viewer, and welcome back. If this is your first time here, this is Jaded Hero Worship, a channel where I discuss heroes in media while giving myself a little art therapy while I'm at it. I'm doing a quick react today about the big superhero news of the week, the costume reveal of David Corenswet's Superman in the James Gunn-helmed Superman Legacy. Before we start there, though, let's dive into a little comic book movie history and review of superhero costumes as a whole. The superhero live-action costume. The translation of a still image into a moving, living representation of a character. Each new project brings excitement and anticipation, and then the reveal. It can make or break a film, cripple anticipation, and cause constant bickering amongst fans. The common question: how hard is it to fill in the blank about such and such character, right? So what makes a good costume? Well, it needs to honor the source, bring in the colors and key elements of a character's classic design, and look cool and functional. My own personal way of conceptualizing this is like if a superhero ran through a room and only a 10-year-old was there to witness it. The 10-year-old tells a police sketch artist or an artist what they saw, and what comes out is the character we know from the comics. So a kid sees Wolverine, he says, yeah, there was this gruff guy, he was kind of angry, he had a lot of hair on his face, he had claws, he was wearing yellow, there were stripes on it, he had a lot of muscles. I work with 10-year-olds, so I'm kind of used to the way they talk, but the point is, from those we get the key details of a costume. But then, if you want to move it back into the real world, what do you do with that information? Well, you have to think about what's going to look good on screen. And over the years, we have seen a lot of what doesn't look good on screen. Some honorable mentions of those not-so-great costumes would be, and sorry to call them out, but, you know, it was what it was, the Ryan Reynolds starring Green Lantern, where a horrible CGI bodysuit was pasted onto Ryan Reynolds. Or then you have the indelible Mr. Freeze, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. The height of the Joel Schumacher toy train. Let's also throw in there a little Fan Four Stick, a little Jared Leto Joker, maybe a little Halle Berry Catwoman, some Colin Farrell Bullseye for you. Then the unfortunate padded suit that Vinnie Jones got to wear as the Juggernaut in X-Men 3. Or who could forget Oscar Isaac's turn as Apocalypse? Or Ivan Ooze, as he also looked. And the crowning achievement in superhero costuming, and how bad it can go. Again, Ryan Reynolds on this list, but don't worry, he's going to get a positive mention. The X-Men Origins Wolverine interpretation of Wade Wilson Deadpool with his mouth literally sealed shut. Man, okay. So those are the awful examples. What are some good examples? Well, pretty clear going forward right now, some great examples would be what they're doing with Wolverine. In all the years Hugh Jackman has played Wolverine, and it's been a lot of years, we never got the true 90s classic X-Men Wolverine costume. Now, there was a reason for this. And it's hard to think of now because for years we've all said, well, why couldn't they have just put him in their costume? And yes, that original 2001 movie had the joke of what would you suggest, yellow spandex, that the oh-so-clever X-Men 97 made fun of. But I do have a little bit of a defense or devil's advocate here for that original X-Men movie. It's worth remembering that Batman and Robin had happened only a few years before, and comic book films were really trying to be taken seriously. So Bryan Singer's answer to the somewhat garish costumes that the X-Men wore in the comics was to put them in the leather flight suits. I'm not saying that was the perfect way to do it. Personally, I would have gone for something that looked a little more like tactical gear that was themed to their original costumes, but that's the way he went with it. Again, I understand the impulse, but, as a lot of people have pointed out, that tended to kind of cripple the way comic book costumes were designed after that. I want to give a little background, very briefly, and anybody who has been watching the videos so far knows I like to do a dive into history like this, but I'm going to keep it real quick. The question of underwear over the superhero suit? Where does it come from? Why is it there? Why is this a thing that anybody does? Well, it really has its origins back in 1920s and 1930s exercise and circus strongman gear. It's seen here with a picture of Jack Dempsey, the boxer in the 1920s, or as various circus strongmen. Essentially, they wore skin-tight leotards and then short shorts over them. Circus strongmen essentially wore bikini briefs. So, when comic book artists were trying to portray what a superhero would wear, that's really the basis they had to go off of. So the shorts kept getting shortened until it just became underwear because that fits the lines of the body better, and thus we have underwear. Now, why that works in a comic book, that's an entire discussion about breaking up a form. It gives you a definition between the torso and the legs, whereas if you didn't do that, it would look like one solid mass. It's an easy way to kind of break the image up and give it clear, defined features and limbs when you need them. So where did this trend of the tactical, hardcore, functional superhero suit come from? Well, really, it started with Blade, made all the way back in 1998. Now, it's important to remember, again, Batman and Robin had been the last comic book movie I had seen in a theater. So when I saw Blade, it sort of made an impact on anyone who saw it at that time. Blade wasn't some goofy George Clooney running around in a rubberized suit with fake muscles on it. He was a tough guy wearing a cool costume that actually looked like functional armor, carrying around a shotgun loaded with silver stakes he was shooting at vampires. There was a big difference, and it looked awesome. I still really enjoy the first two Blade movies and think there is a lot to enjoy about them. And when you see Blade's original costume from the early 70s comics, it's clearly an upgrade. But what happened because of that was tactical became the key idea. Make it look functional, make it look tactical. And that really is wherein a lot of the problems lie. For example, Batman, a character that has probably been on screen more than almost any other character outside of Spider-Man, rarely looks the way he actually does in the comics. In classic Batman comics, it's essentially a gray bodysuit with blue underwear, blue gauntlets, blue boots, and a blue cape and cowl. But Michael Keaton didn't really fit that stature, that build at the time, so he wore an armored, rubberized batsuit. We went from the rubberized, armored look that Michael Keaton wore to the more flamboyant Val Kilmer look, to the extremely glitzy George Clooney look, and that killed comic book movies until Blade came back, then the X-Men, which carried forward the gritty idea, and then we got Batman Begins. And that specifically told us that Batman's suit was armor. It got even more armor-like in The Dark Knight, and then Batfleck. There's going to be a little bit more discussion about Zack Snyder's design choices here in a little bit, but I'll just say I appreciate the instinct to make Ben Affleck look like the Frank Miller-inspired Dark Knight, where he's a very bulky, solid figure. I'm not a fan of the panther ears, so we move on from Batfleck, and then we get the Batman, where it's even more armored. Going back to Wolverine. Wolverine moved through his leather jumpsuit phase, and then in both Logan and the Wolverine, he had no costume at all. I, for one, really love the look of Logan, but again, there's no suit there. Days of Future Past, he had kind of a hinted at comic book costume, but again, it's just more tactical armor. But now, modern era, we finally have the actual Wolverine costume. And I've even seen pictures showing that they're actually going to do his mask with the whited out eyes. So going back to those great superhero costumes, I think the most accurate ones, I'm actually going to start with a fairly obscure one, which is Dick Tracy, played by Warren Beatty all the way back in the 90s. Whole crazy history on him and that character, but man, that dude nailed the look of that character. Then you have characters like Hellboy, played wonderfully by Ron Perlman, and then we get to the MCU era, when Marvel, pre-Disney, set the stage. They did the impossible, and they took the Adi Granov illustrations of Iron Man, and they brought them to the screen. In bringing Iron Man to the screen, Marvel was able to capture a real feel of a comic book come to life. The Iron Man armor, still to this day, all the way up through the first 2 phases of the MCU, looks fantastic. My peak on when I personally think it looked its best is kind of a mix between the Age of Ultron armor and the Civil War armor. It looked really cool and cutting edge, but it still had that real feel of metal and texture and a real tactile sense to it. I fondly remember the scene of Tony Stark tightening a screw on his gauntlet as he's watching the news, and you hear the servos and all the motors going in that, and you just feel the power in that. Cut forward to Infinity War, and suddenly it's the CGI nanotech armor, and I'm sorry, it just always looked rubbery to me, as awesome as Infinity War is. But moving on, best costumes. Really any Spider-Man costume, live action, outside of the first Amazing Spider-Man when they went for a weird basketball rubberized texture. But the Sam Raimi Spider-Man costume always looked great. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 costume really captured kind of a 90s aesthetic that I have a lot more to say about Andrew Garfield and why I really wanted him to tell the 90s Spider-Man stories. And that leads us up to Tom Holland. When they actually did a really cool thing, and I remember loving this so much when I saw Civil War, where when they did give him the Stark Tech suit, they actually gave him eyes that closed and widened, explaining that it was automatic motors that were going to close off sensory perception. But it gave it that comic book look of when his eyes would tighten and squinch and widen based on whatever he was doing. Really cool in-world explanation for a comic book feature. And with Spider-Man, that leads us all the way up to his most recent costume, seen at the end of No Way Home, that for me was a pure joy, core memory, go back to my childhood moment, when it looked almost exactly like an illustration from a John Romita book my mom bought me at a gas station when I was 7. And for me, the top 3 of all time comic book costumes in a film based on a superhero. Christopher Reeve, Superman, Deadpool, and Black Panther from Civil War. I think those 3 costumes are top-notch, nail the look of the character, and almost cannot be beaten. I could go on for days about all 3 of these costumes. The benefits of the Deadpool costume. They committed to the whited out eyes. It's expressive, it's fun, it looks like the comic book panel come to life, but there's a little bit of a dirty texture to it. So much about that costume that I can appreciate. Moving on to Civil War Black Panther, which honestly, between this and Christopher Reeve Superman, they're almost neck and neck for number 1. I really go back and forth on which one, depending on the day. Civil War Black Panther suit, to me, proves how much you can make these characters really leap off of the screen. It is a fantastic design. I miss it so much. The woven texture, the whited out eyes, there's a structure to it. It looks cool. It moves in a great way. Just a brilliant design that I wish would come back. I miss that costume so much, and I hated that we only got it for 1 movie. And finally, Christopher Reeve as Superman. People argue that this suit is dated or that it doesn't look right. And for my money, I just don't agree. I think it is a classic and will never go out of style. And I'm going to explain that here in just a moment, how it ties into this costume reveal and what I have to say about it. Because at the end of the day, it is simple, yes, but it's clean lines, bright colors. He looks like a hero. And what was really important was that there were no fake muscles. It was all Christopher Reeve. Much like one of the true Batmen of the era, Adam West.
And I didn't need molded plastic to improve my physique. Pure West.
But this costume really, in a lot of ways, elevated superheroes to a whole new thing. They made it something that could actually function on screen. And yes, I will freely admit, going back now, the full movies, they can be hard to watch in places. They're hokey. They have some really awkward moments. But Christopher Reeve never goes out of style. So now moving on to the David Corenswet Superman costume reveal. So initial thoughts, yeah, meh, overall. Look, I'm absolutely not a part of the Snyder cult, and we'll speak on him in a moment. But for this video, I'll be honest, I have issues with this costume, and it continues something I had worried about from the first. Gunn not letting go of some of his visual fixation. Being as succinct as possible, while a fan of Gunn's overall output in the realm of superhero films, he has visual instincts I have worried about from the beginning would not merge with Superman. Why? Well, Superman is a character who works best in a bright, colorful, retro, futuristic world. This has been a staple of his better stories from the beginning. Superman is more than most superheroes, a science fiction fantasy. The name of Superman's home city, Metropolis, comes from the 1927 Fritz Lang film of the same name, counted as one of the first science fiction films ever made. In the Fleischer cartoon serials, the best of them feature Superman battling robots, mad scientists, and death rays. His origin as an alien from another planet and his homeworld of Krypton lend themselves to these types of stories. So when designing Superman's world, or a Superman costume, that has to be taken into account. The classic Superman the Animated Series discovered this in the mid-90s. I won't do a full breakdown of it. Watchtower Database has a wonderful video on that history if you would like to know more. In short, after creating the now famous Dark Deco art style, an anachronistic 1940s aesthetic for Batman the Animated Series, Bruce Timm and co. were tasked with creating a world for Superman. They struggled to find the right aesthetic, feeling that initial designs did not quite work. It was only once they stumbled onto the idea of a clean 1950s retro futuristic world with Kirby tech, inspired by the illustrations of legendary illustrator Jack Kirby, that they found their look for the entire series. They found that a world for Superman functions best when defined by clean lines, bright colors, and the 1950s idea of a better tomorrow. This is not James Gunn's aesthetic. Gunn as a filmmaker loves texture in his visuals and costumes. He likes a sort of dirty cloth, leathery look to his costumes and worlds. It works extremely well in his early films like Super, about a normal guy putting on a makeshift DIY costume, or in Guardians with the sort of back alley outlaws with a heart of gold vibe those movies had. But even his Kree and Nova Corps outfits had a pebbled, roughened look to them. Again, not bad for the world he was building, but not Superman. Coming up to his recent work at DC, Suicide Squad has a similar lived-in, grimy design aesthetic. It works in this case because it's not the big league. These aren't heroes. They're D-listers trying to do the right thing. But now, Gunn is on Superman. He's decided he's going to helm it. From the beginning, I had my doubts about Gunn's design choices that were going to be happening on this movie. I knew his Superman costume was going to really set the tone, and wanted him to get rid of his own personal habits and choices. But he didn't. When you look at this costume, there's so much to pick out. It's wrinkly. It has a similar pebbled basketball-ish texture to that Amazing Spider-Man 1 suit. There's odd wrinkling that's happening. It looks loose on the actor. The new 52 suit that this seems to be mostly based on has all of these ribbing lines or separating lines. It has the high neck, the cape bolted into the shoulder, and whatever the belt is here. Yes, they brought back the trunks, and he has the Kingdom Come S. Other than that, I don't know what's going on with this suit. And it was a particularly bad shot to reveal him in. This sort of ho-hum, I'm going to do the hard work thing he's got going. I get what they were going for, but just not how you want to reveal Superman. You want to reveal Superman standing triumphantly on a roof in the sunlight, or opening his shirt to expose the new suit. This kind of looks like a guy doing cosplay, as a lot of people have made the joke about. Like he's getting on his suit to go out for a party, or, to hit up the convention. And it's sad because the actor did a lot of work. I mean, there are social media posts of this guy working out or getting ripped, so it just feels like Gunn is giving in to his same impulses. It feels like a suit right out of Guardians. Muted colors, overly textured. And this has been a problem with Superman's suit for a while. Every director has fallen into this trap since Donner. Even all the way back in Superman Returns, I remember they did this bizarre thing where they put S's all over the bottoms of his shoes where no one would ever see it. They added all this weird texturing to the blue. I hate that costume so much. I think it's the worst he's looked on screen. The weird small trunks, the tiny S, the half booties, it's just bad. I could go on for days about that one. Then there's Man of Steel. And, oh God, all the people posting all the pictures of Henry Cavill trying to say, "Are you sorry yet?" Gun fans and all that, leaving that behind. Because that suit wasn't great either. The colors were way too muted, it was way too dark, it was not the bright Superman costume. All you have to do is look at any picture of Henry Cavill. That dude is in insane Superman shape. And yet, Zack Snyder, the genius visionary that he is, made a muscle suit for Henry Cavill to wear on top of his muscles that just made the suit look fake. Ah, God, it's so frustrating. This is a personal pet peeve I'm going to get out about the Man of Steel thing. If you've seen any pictures of Henry Cavill, his hair naturally does the Superman S, where it falls into that wave pattern. If you watch a movie like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., you'll see him behave in a much more calm, Superman-ish fashion. And what did Zack Snyder do? He hit him with the hair gel and shellacked his hair down on his head so that he didn't have the curl. I'm sure it was intentional, given the way that man describes things. But no, the Man of Steel suit was not better than this suit. It just wasn't. It was way overcomplicated too, way too textured. They keep adding to the suit when what works for Superman, again, is simple, clean, bright colors and clean lines. You want to evoke that Frank Quietly 1950s aesthetic. Again, the clean lines, the bright colors, they look hopeful, they look futuristic, they say Superman, man of tomorrow. This does not. I hope it looks better in motion, but right now I am just not feeling it. So, I'm going to leave off there. Maybe tell me your favorite superhero costume down in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the breakdown. Thank you for sticking around this long. If you want to see what I have coming up next, I have another X-Men 97 review. I'm going to continue with that and finish that series. So much to talk about with every episode. Other than that, I am working on the Captain Marvel pitch and my full breakdown for True Detective Season 4. And until next time, maximum effort.